conscious, as every member is, that there are different opinions about the merits of the procedure being followed today, as there are different opinions about the merits of the procedure followed yesterday and the merits of the procedure followed at the time of the bill introduced by the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford. But those are matters of political dispute, not, in my judgment, of rule observance or procedural propriety. We are proceeding in a proper manner. That manner may offend the instincts of some members, but that doesn't make it improper. It may mean simply that it is distasteful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. And I am sorry if that is the case, but it doesn't mean that he's made a valid point of a procedural character. Oh, well, I'm so fond of the Honourable Gentleman, I have such a high respect for him, I'll take one more, but after that we really must proceed. Point of order, Sir William Cash.
I understand your ruling. I just wanted to put on the record that where I was referring to discussions that have taken place, these have been based, in fact, on some extremely learned analyses by, for example, Dr. Robert Craig, which is available on blogging and various papers of that description, and also, of course, Sir Stephen Law's former first Parliamentary Counsel. So these issues have been looked at over the last period of time, and I just wanted to put that on the record.
Honourable Gentleman, for putting that on the record, what he's either the character, the integrity or the ability of the Clerk of Legislation, who is deeply versed in these matters and regularly consults his scholarly cranium in order to provide advice to members in all parts of the House on them. If on this occasion the view of the Clerk of Legislation is uncongenial to the Honourable Gentleman, that is obviously most unfortunate, notably for the Honourable Gentleman, but it doesn't further advance his cause this afternoon. I hope that we can leave it there because, well, if it's a completely different point, if the Honourable Gentleman just wants to pursue the same argument, no.
Thank you, Speaker, for taking my point of order. You're very gracious in this matter. I simply seek your guidance. I'm reading this bill, which I've just received. It's literally just come from the Vote Office, and it, to my mind, directs the Prime Minister to seek from the European Council an extension to Article 50, which is an exercise, to my mind, my understanding, of prerogative powers. So I just want to further...
Order! Please resume your... I'm sorry, but when the Speaker's on his feet, it's not about me, it's about the office of the Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman resumes his seat. He's making a point that's important to him. It's a point of debate. It's a perfectly valid point of debate. It's not a new point. It's not a point that requires adjudication by the Chair. Sorry, it's a political point, and he can make it in the course of the debate. There's nothing further to be added. In accordance with the order of yesterday of this House, I call Hilary Benn to move the second reading of the European Union withdrawal number...
to act in the national interests and in the interests of their constituents. The problem, the reason why we are here today, is of course that each of us has a stand on this issue. We know there is very little time left, and following the decision on prorogation, there is even less time than would have been available previously, and therefore I hope that we will treat each other, recognising we have strongly held views, with respect and consideration during this debate. Now, the purpose of the bill is very simple. It is to ensure that the United Kingdom does not leave the European Union on the 31st of October without an agreement. The bill has wide cross-party support. Can I say it's a great pleasure to be just above on the order list the Honourable Member for North East Bedfordshire, and is backed by members who have very different views on how the matter of Brexit should finally be resolved, including members who until very recently were senior members of the Cabinet. Now, you could describe it as a somewhat unlikely alliance, but what unites us is a conviction that there is no mandate for no deal, and that the consequences for the economy and for our country would be highly damaging. Those supporting the bill believe that no deal is not in the national interest. Of course I will give way.
Quick question, if I may, and I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. when he talks about no deal, there are multiple sector deals. So does he not see those sector deals as being multiple deals in their own right?
Well, I don't know where these sector deals are. Yes. My concern and the reason for this bill and the support that I hope it will enjoy in the House today is because the Prime Minister has made it absolutely clear that he is prepared to leave on the 31st of October without a deal. And those of us who I hope will support the bill today do not wish that to happen.
Give way on that?
I will give way.
Would you agree that, in a sense, with these debates going on for long periods of time, many of us have tried to learn lessons from them, and in that process people have changed their mind or their order of importance to prevent a no-deal Brexit? One of the amendments today is to give people another look at what we might call the May Plus proposal, where people turned it down at the time, but feel that had it been on the order paper, if they had the experience they have now, they might have voted differently. Might I ask, given with all the rush there necessarily has been, has you had a chance to look at that amendment by my honourable friend member Aberfan, which now has quite a large amount of support, that we have another look at that as an alternative to a hard Brexit?
Well, I've not had a chance to read the final version, and it will be tabled with the clerks during the course of this second reading debate, but I'm aware of the intention of the amendments, and I completely understand what my honourable friends are trying to achieve. We cannot continue to delay taking a decision. I shall come back to that point later in my speech, and I will, of course, listen to the debate that follows during committee stage. I would just say this, however, that the bill is deliberately open as to the purpose of the extension, so it provides a framework for reporting and debate, and it is supported, as I've just pointed out, by honourable and right honourable members who have already voted for a deal and would vote for one again. And I would just say it's very important that we focus on the principal purpose, which is to prevent a no-deal Brexit, and to keep the coalition that shares that view together. But I will have more to say about that when we come to the end of the... I will, of course, give way to the right honourable.
Thank you very much. Does the right honourable gentleman believe that a matter of such importance, irrespective of the speed with which all this is being done, should really be dealt with ultimately in the context of a general election?
Well, there may well be a general election at some point, but this legislation, in my view, needs to be passed, needs to go through the other place, it needs to receive royal assent, and it needs to be given effect. In other words, we must, in my opinion, secure that extension to Article 50. Otherwise, there is a risk that the election would result in us leaving without a deal, which, as it may turn out at 7 o'clock tonight, is not what the House of Commons wants, and we should respect the view of the House of Commons. I will give way, yes.
I'm grateful for him giving way. If this bill does pass and it's given royal assent, can you think of any other reason why the Labour Party would not accept a general election?
I think I've just explained the reason. It's been made clear by the leader of the Labour Party, my right honourable friend, and the Shadow Brexit Secretary and others, because we must deal with first things first, and preventing a no-deal Brexit is the central, most important question facing the country.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for allowing me to intervene. I think he's answered my query. The reality is an election at this stage, or even next week, undermines the purpose of this legislation, and we can't support it.
Well, I can only agree, and I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for being one of the sponsors of the bill. I will take one more intervention at this stage because there are many people who want to speak. Time is short. Indeed.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman. And can I applaud his call for respect on all sides, because we just need to calm down this whole debate. I voted for the deal twice. He voted against the deal 3 times, presumably because he thought it was not in the best interests of this country. So how does he think this procedure of delaying any agreement yet further is going to produce an offer from the EU that might actually tempt him into voting something because it's even in the better interest of the UK than what has gone before? How can that possibly come about by this procedure?
Well, the reason why I voted against the deal 3 times was not to do with the withdrawal agreement, the legally binding treaty. It was to do with the nature of the political declaration and the absolute lack of clarity about where the then Prime Minister wanted to take the country. Now, that's my view, and other members have got different views. If I could bring us back, if honourable members will forgive me, I'm not going to give way further at this point. I have been reasonably generous, and I am conscious of the time. The evidence before us about the consequences of no deal, it's really important that we acknowledge that, because it is the fundamental reason behind the bill. As we heard from my right honourable friend, the member for Pontefract, Normanton and Castleford, when she moved her bill earlier this year, it was reported that the Cabinet Secretary and the National Security Advisor, Sir Mark Sedwill, had told the previous Cabinet that no deal would make our country less safe. Now, if the National Security Advisor says that to the Cabinet, we ought to pay attention. All of us have seen the government's own economic assessment that makes it clear that no deal will cause the greatest loss to the economy. We know that Make UK, for example, the body that represents British manufacturing industry, have described no deal as an act of economic vandalism. And since we last debated the question of an extension, new information has come to light about the consequences of no deal. The government itself has now admitted that there would be damage to companies. Why? Because they've said they're prepared to compensate certain businesses and industries, which is the first time in my experience the government has advocated a policy that they know will do economic damage. If I could just finish this point. And Operation Yellowhammer, the report that was published in the Sunday Times, talked about the potential for protests, for significant delays, for lorries at Dover and other ports, and we heard very powerful evidence on that subject only this morning in the Brexit Select Committee. A potential impact on medicines, decrease in the supply of fresh foods and some price rises, impact on petrol refineries, huge uncertainty for businesses, serious damage to farmers, and in some ways, given the progress that Northern Ireland have made in the last 20 years, most worrying of all, expressing the view that the current open border between Northern Ireland and the Republic could be unsustainable because of economic, legal and biosecurity risks. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and of course I'm keen to be supporting this bill today. He made the point about security. Is he aware that we repeatedly heard in the Home Affairs Committee evidence from senior police officers and security officials about the devastating impact of a no-deal Brexit? We keep hearing from the government all the time about bilateral security treaties. Well, they're not in place. We don't have those agreements to keep our borders safe from terrorists, criminals, paedophiles and others who would exploit our national security.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend completely. It's one of the many unanswered questions about what happens the other side of Halloween. And it's a point I shall come back to a little later on in my speech. I will give way.
For giving way. Can I just clarify one thing? Because members of his party have made comments in the media, and he, I think, said this earlier, that this bill stops no deal. Can we be clear that this bill does not stop no deal? It prolongs the date before we leave. And the likelihood is, unless something dramatically changes, we will be exactly at this point a few weeks before the new deadline. And the only way to stop no deal is to revoke Article 50. And if that is really what members...
A way forward, I have my own views, as have other members, about how that should be done, but that is not the purpose of this bill today, although it would provide for a framework within which the government can then decide what it's going to do. I would simply say, and other members will have lots of other experience of the potential consequences, these are not risks that
to get this done, close quotes, to move on, close quotes. The practical imperative is that no deal doesn't allow us to move on. It resolves nothing, and it leads to many of the implications that he talked about. And if we have no withdrawal agreement on the 31st of October, what we have to do on the 1st of November is seek a withdrawal agreement.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and in a lot of this debate we haven't discussed anything like enough what happens the other side of the 31st of October if the Prime Minister is able to get his way, and I shall come to that point in a moment. I will give way.
For giving way, Chairman of the Brexit Select Committee. What his bill today does, and what he's doing is trying to prolong no damage. till as far as the 31st of January, and make UK are absolutely correct. Anything else but the current deal we've got will damage the economy. But the best way, and we've all got to get our heads around this, the best way to stop any damage at all is to revoke Article 50. I've laid an amendment to that end with a helpful letter to the schedule. It needs one signature, that of the Prime Minister. And this nightmare is over in that length of time.
Well, I disagree respectfully with the honourable gentleman, because I think just as no deal is unacceptable, in my opinion, I think revocation, which is basically saying let's cancel the whole result of the referendum, is not acceptable either. I've expressed previously in the House my view about how we should resolve this by going back to the people, but other members have different views. That is not the issue for today. I will give way to my honourable friend and then my other honourable friend, and then I am going to progress.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way, and if I may say, particularly grateful to the right honourable gentleman for the way in which he's chairing his Brexit Select Committee and taking this vital evidence. Isn't that really the point, over and above this bill? That this is precisely the sort of work that should be done. Questions should be laid in and asked of ministers. This place should be making sure that we are ready for any no deal. And yet what we're seeing is we're being closed down next week, when in fact we should be sitting, asking the questions, and his committee and others should be able to do their valuable work.
Well, the honourable member is absolutely right, because one of the consequences of prorogation is our select committees cannot meet, we cannot scrutinise the government, we cannot hold it to account. That is what we're saying.
Does the honourable gentleman agree with me that it's surprising that there would appear to be those in this House who know more about making cars than those who make cars, more about building planes than those who build planes, more about engineering than the engineers, and that the simple truth is the overwhelming and unmistakable voice of the world of work, industry and all the employers' organisations and the trade unions is that a no-deal Brexit would have catastrophic consequences, with tens of thousands of workers losing their jobs, making our country a poorer country in every sense of the word for years to come.
My honourable friend makes a really powerful point. And I think those industries and those sectors, and we've all met them and heard their evidence, are troubled that the message that comes from their expertise and knowledge, they after all are the people creating the wealth of the country, is not being heard by a government that says we're prepared to leave with no deal on the 31st of October. Since my honourable friend is in the room next door to me, of course I will go away, and then I am going to make progress.
I'm grateful for the right honourable friend to giving way. I've actually received this morning a letter from the North East England Chamber of Commerce, in which they say over the last 3 years we've been clear and consistent, preserving the trading conditions and relationship we currently enjoy with the EU ought to be the primary objective of any Brexit outcome. Sadly, the government's willingness to embrace no deal as an acceptable end to the Brexit negotiations flies in the face of this. And they go on to say that it's a disastrous outcome for the North East of England. Doesn't these comments go to prove that his bill is an absolute necessity?
I think they absolutely do. And having now, in a sense, concluded a discussion and a reflection on the economic and other consequences of no deal, I want now to turn to what the bill actually does, because it intends to stop this happening by seeking an extension to Article 50 in certain very specific circumstances. It's very important to understand that the bill allows the Prime Minister the opportunity to reach a new agreement with the European Union at the European Council and to seek Parliament's consent to any such agreement. That is condition 1. It also allows the government to bring a motion to the House of Commons to seek our consent for leaving without a deal, for example, if discussions at the European Council prove unsuccessful. Now, I think the government would find it rather difficult to get such a motion through the House of Commons, but the bill allows them to seek to do that. Clause 1 specifically provides for both of those eventualities, and if either of those conditions is met, then there can be no further extension. If, however, neither of these conditions have been met by the 19th of October, chosen the day very deliberately, it is the day after the conclusion of the European Council, then the Prime Minister must ask the EU for a further extension until the 31st of January 2020 in the form of the letter set out in the schedule to the bill. Clause 3 deals with what happens next. If the European Council accedes to that request, then the Prime Minister must agree to it. If, however, the Council proposes an extension to a different date, then the Prime Minister must agree to that as well, unless the House of Commons decides not to pass a motion agreeing to it. That's what subsection 3 does. Now, it has been wrongly claimed in some commentary that the EU could propose an extension of any length, 6 months, 20 years, a millennium, and the Prime Minister would be required to accept it. Not so. In those circumstances, the House could decide. Furthermore, if a deal is reached after the Prime Minister has asked for an extension, then that would override any extension. So it also allows him, if he can, to reach a deal after the European Council concludes on the 18th of October. In other words, I will give way, of course, to the right honourable gentleman in a moment. In other words, the bill gives the Prime Minister the flexibility that he wants and needs to get a deal, if he can. What it does not render further negotiation pointless. If the Prime Minister were here, I would say this forcefully to him. It seems to me what does is the Prime Minister's apparent refusal to put any proposals to the EU if this bill passes, which I can only describe as a very odd state of affairs. Of course I will give way.
To the right honourable gentleman, because clause 3.2 is very clear that the period of 2 days begins with the end of the day on which the European Council's decision is made. Decision is made. We were told very clearly during proceedings on the change of date after the 2 previous occasions that the government accepted an extension, that we were merely implementing a decision that was already made and binding in European Community law, European Union law. So what his proposal depends upon is the European Union making a conditional offer that is only comes into force if they choose to make it conditional on subsequent approval by the House of Commons. He has no way of binding the European Union's procedures by a domestic piece of legislation.
The purpose of that is, if the bill is passed, the House of Commons will pass it in the knowledge that it is seeking, in the circumstances set out, for an extension to the 31st of January. If, however, the European Union proposes a different date, it seems to be only right and proper that the Prime Minister should be able to say either, yeah, that's fine by me, or I will need to go back and check. I agree with the right honourable gentleman that, of course, we cannot bind the European Union in the way which it seeks to work, but it's not at all unusual for member states to say, well, we will need to go back and check with our parliament. And I'm certain, given the importance of this issue, that the European Union would be able to find another procedure which might not involve the European Council meeting again to confirm the decision that it had made in making the offer in the first place. And the second point I would make is that 2 days is precisely to give the Prime Minister the chance to come back to the House. In those circumstances, I will give way.
Right honourable gentleman for giving way. My reading of this bill is it doesn't stop no deal. It postpones it potentially for 3 months. It doesn't stop it. But it does make it virtually impossible for our Prime Minister to negotiate, and is therefore actually a political bill, which is sadly some on our side have supported with. Because actually what it does is it tells the European Union that if they don't choose to negotiate and they don't choose to give us a better deal, but many of this bill is rejected, what they will instead get is the opportunity to offer us an extension of whatever they want for this House to take.
Well, I dealt with the last point, extension of whatever length, because there is a means of the government asking the House not to approve that, and then the House would have to decide in the light of what had been offered by the European Union. But I don't accept her central premise that this somehow undermines the Prime Minister's negotiating ability. If she I'm responding to her, if she'd just bear with me, because I don't myself regard the threat of a no-deal Brexit as part of a credible negotiating strategy, if the Honourable Lady would bear with me, because the previous Prime Minister spent, nearly 2 years saying no deal's better than a bad deal,
Yes, exactly.
and it didn't seem to work then, and I don't think it's going to work now. I will give way one more time.
Correct. If the European Union came back and offered us a 10-year extension, as the Right Honourable Gentleman has suggested, then it would then be a choice for this House between a 10-year extension and the no deal he so wishes to avoid.
No, that is not the case. The House could decide to ask the Prime Minister to go back in those circumstances. The central point is that it gives the House of Commons in those circumstances the ability to express a view, but if the extension is to the 31st of January, we would have already decided that we were prepared to accept that. So only if he does not get a deal does the bill prevent the Prime Minister from taking us out of the EU without an agreement. Can I just... Well, I will give way one more time to the Right Honourable Gentleman.
Because Article 53 of the Treaty on European Union boldly says that we leave on after 2 years, quotes, unless the European Council, in agreement with the member state concerned, unanimously decides to extend the period. Now, there is no obligation in that for the European Union to decide to make a conditional offer. They can decide, and yet the bill requires the Prime Minister, under those circumstances, to accept the terms that are on offer. That's it. So this is handing the decision not back to this House, but back to the European Union.
I don't agree with that. And, of course, there is no guarantee with any of these provisions that a further request from the United Kingdom for another extension of Article 50 will be granted by the European Union. We all recognise that, because it only takes one member state of the European Union to say, no, I'm not giving the United Kingdom a further extension, for us to be in even greater difficulty than we are already. But what this is seeking to do is to require the Prime Minister to ask and then to agree to one, because this is what is required to prevent the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, from taking us out of the EU on the 31st of October without a deal. We didn't have to put those provisions in the earlier bill moved by my right honourable friend, the member for Pontefract, Normanton and Castleford, because the former Prime Minister readily accepted the decision of the House of Commons, but we are in different circumstances. Can I move on, Mr. Speaker, to what Clause 2 does? Because it covers what happens if an extension is proposed and agreed. Now, members have asked quite rightly, what is the extension for? The immediate answer is, of course, to avoid a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, but Clause 2 does provide a framework in which the government must publish a report to the House on the 30th of November. And it comes back to the point that my right honourable friend raised with me earlier, if the member would just bear with me, and move a motion to the effect that the House has approved the report. So that is a chance for the government to say, right, well, what are we going to do next? And it's also something that we can point to with the European Union, because remember last time Mr. Tusk said, use the time well, and it's important that we as a House show we're not just saying, right, we want a further extension, then we're going to twiddle our thumbs for another 3 months. It is a process that is being suggested here in the bill. If the report is amended or rejected, there must be further reports from the government, and again on the 10th of January, and then every 28 days thereafter, until an agreement is either reached with the EU or otherwise indicated by resolution of the House. And I think the framework that is in Clause 2 of the bill will help answer the question about what we intend to do with the additional time, and that will be a matter for Parliament. I will give way to my honourable.
Surely one of the things that we want to do during that time is try to find a solution to the Irish question. Is he aware that the EU Commission Task Force is reporting that the PM is reneging on his commitment to protect the all-island economy and meaningful north-south cooperation? So clearly the time should be used to ensure there is decent cooperation.
I have those reports, Mr. Speaker, and they concern me, as I know they will concern the honourable gentleman and many other people in the House. So the aim of this clause is not, I think the Leader of the House suggested yesterday, to create a marionette government, but I would argue to give the government the time it needs to do its job. And I say that because it's not clear what is happening at the moment, as we discussed yesterday, how much negotiation is actually taking place. when no proposals have been made. Now, and it's really very hard to understand that, since I would have thought the government was working flat out since July. Now, even if agreement was reached, I think it's also important to make the point that it's very hard to see how you could then get the House's approval and pass all the legislation between the 18th of October or so and the 31st. Now, the final point, Mr. Speaker, I want to make is this. What would happen if we left with no deal? The Prime Minister talks about getting it done and ending the uncertainty. But the truth is, and the honourable member made the point so powerfully, no deal does not end anything. It would simply plunge us into greater uncertainty of all. Uncertainty, no, I'm going to bring my remarks to a close. Uncertainty about the degree and length of disruption, uncertainty about the border arrangements in Northern Ireland, uncertainty about what our future trading relationship would be with our biggest, nearest and most important trading partners, the other members of the European Union. And given that it's taken 3 years to get this far, in other words, not very far at all, and given that it took Canada 7 years to negotiate a deal, and the Prime Minister says he wants a super Canada deal, it's going to take years to agree a new relationship, and every single EU member state and every single EU member state parliament and regional parliament will have to agree to any deal. No deal will not be the end of Brexit, it will only be the end of the beginning. And in that time, faced with the degree of uncertainty, businesses are going to have countless decisions to make about where to invest, what to make and where, and what to do about the sudden disappearance of all the arrangements that they have come to know and work within, and the sudden imposition of tariffs. Mr. Speaker, it would be utterly irresponsible to allow this to happen. We have a duty to prevent it, and I hope the House will vote for this bill tonight.
Order. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. In an attempt to accommodate lots of members who wish to take part, I'm obliged to impose a 5-minute limit on backbench speeches with immediate effect. Mr. Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak as the proud but slightly bemused independent member for North East Bedfordshire. Let me make, if I may, just 3 brief points in support of the bill, and to commend my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, for his remarks and the way he went through the technicalities. I've no wish to do the same and don't wish to detain the House in relation to that. Just 3 points briefly. Is the bill a stumbling block to negotiations? No, it's not. The bill does not, in my view, prevent the Prime Minister or the government from negotiating. For the reason that we don't yet have a deal, or might not get one, is not this bill. Ever since the referendum and the start of negotiations, a variety of reasons have been cited for not getting a deal. In no particular order, it's been a Remainer Parliament, a Remainer Prime Minister, Ollie Robbins, the EU, Michel Barnier, Martin Selmayr, always a different reason. We were told recently all could be solved if only we elected a Prime Minister who was a Brexiteer, with an absolute determination to leave, no questions asked. Then the EU would fold, and we would have the deal the UK always wanted. We have such a Prime Minister whose determination is clear. The EU has not folded. So we're told this time, it's us, it's me. This is nonsense. There's 2 reasons we haven't had a deal. Firstly, members in this House have not voted for a deal, which if they looked at it hard, they would have bitten the hand off people 2 years ago to accept all the provisions in the withdrawal agreement, and a transition period that the Brexiteer will now be in charge of. And the second reason is that many in the UK have failed to grasp it was we who left the EU. And that means that it's a negotiation between us, and we've never really understood the EU or its arguments and believed a negotiation was a series of demands from the United Kingdom, not a negotiation. That and the language that we have used, built on 20-odd years of drip of poison about the EU, has made sure that we didn't get a deal. Very briefly, if I may.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way on that point, and we both came in the House in the same year, and I'm sad to see his announcement that he's going. Does he agree with me that the kind of language that is being used from the front bench and in the media about those who are trying to prevent no deal, traitors, collaborators, All of that war-like language is less than helpful.
Absolutely. I shall come in my conclusion to talk a little bit about that and how we've got to reset, but my right honourable friend makes a good point. And secondly, why do we want to avoid no deal? I won't repeat all the things that my right honourable friend said that are obvious and the economics are clear, but for me there's three things. Firstly, the threat to the Union. I'm a Scot. My mother and father from Scotland. I'm a proud Scot. I'm British through and through. I couldn't believe a poll of Conservative members recently that said they'd abandon almost anything, including the Union, providing they left the EU. I regard that as a terrible threat. We should not risk it. Secondly, Ireland. Ireland treated by some here as some sort of irrelevance, a place where they have made up the border issue in order to prevent us leaving the EU. With our history in relation to Ireland, everything that happened there, they became our best friends in the European Union. And our choice to leave, our Brexit, has put them in the most catastrophic situation of any country, and we now expect them to accept another English demand that they should do something. Have we no understanding of what that relationship means and the damage done? And thirdly, the damage to Europe and the relationship with Europe itself. I grew up as the first generation to avoid war in Europe for countless hundreds of years. I arrived in the House of Commons when there were giants. Dennis Healey, Willie Whitelaw, Ted Heath, people for whom Europe was the place where they and their friends had fought and died, and they wanted something different. And that has always motivated me in my sense of Europe. And whether we are in the European Union or not, that relationship with Europe is clouded by the sort of language that the Right Honourable Lady has mentioned. I don't want to see that threatened by a no deal. And lastly,
his second intervention,
just a moment. I've listened to the Right Honourable Gentleman involuntarily for most of the years I've been here. Most, not all, because I went to campaign for him in his by-election, I think, of 1984. I've no wish to hear from him voluntarily. Let me go on. Thirdly, and in conclusion, let me end where I began, as the independent member for North East Bedfordshire. I don't complain at the removal of the whip. Voting on an issue of confidence, I accept the rules. But to my colleagues here, just think of how this looks. This morning, the Conservative Party lost Ruth Davison last week. George Young in the House of Lords resigned as the whip. And my right honourable friends from Rushcliffe, from Runnymede and Weybridge, who made the economy we were cheering just a few minutes ago. What are people going to think about what we have left and what we have lost? Some will have been very happy at the fact that some have been purged. A few weeks ago, one of our colleagues retweeted an article in the Daily Telegraph that looked forward to the purging of Remoaners in the Conservative Party. That was disgraceful. And I say to my colleagues, if we are being purged now, who's next? Who's next? Watch a film called Good Night and Good Luck, and you'll take my point. This may be the last substantive speech I make here, as I'm not standing again, and who knows when the election will come. I will leave with the best of memories of this place, of friends and colleagues on all sides. The obsession of my party has developed may have sought to devalue my past as a friend of the EU, of our sister centre-right parties and many friends, and it may have curtailed my future, but it will not rob me of what I believe, and I will walk out of here looking up at the sky, not down at my shoes.
Order. Thank you. Order. Colleagues, maiden speech, Jane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be speaking in this particular debate. May I start firstly by paying tribute to my predecessor, Mr. Chris Davis. He worked hard for our local communities, raising awareness on the very difficult issue of mental health and suicide in farmers. I thank him for his service. Chris followed hard on the heels of the highly respected Liberal Democrat MP Roger Williams. Roger's are large boots to fill, and if I can even partially match his passion, service and commitment, I shall be very pleased. It is a huge pleasure to represent Brecon and Radnorshire, one of the most beautiful constituencies in the country. It's also the largest constituency in England and Wales, something that I'm sure some members here will have discovered during the recent by-election when searching for yet another elusive farmhouse up yet another long and scenic track. Brecon and Radnorshire is home to strong and resilient communities, some of which are Welsh-speaking. Sadly, many of our libraries, banks and post offices in these communities have closed in recent years. But despite this, there is a real joy for life in the old counties of Radnorshire and Brecknockshire, as well as healthy rivalry between them, that make sure the Mid-Wales spirit, yr ysbryd, is alive and well. Many members here will have had the luxury of making their maiden speeches in the weeks and months following a general election, looking forward to many years of a full parliamentary term. Mine couldn't be in more different circumstances. On the night of the by-election, I promised the people of Brecon and Radnorshire that I would tell the Prime Minister exactly why a no-deal Brexit would be damaging for my constituents. Well, I am delighted that my very first vote as the Member of Parliament for Brecon and Radnorshire last night was to help Parliament take back control of the agenda and do everything possible to prevent us leaving the EU without a deal, including speaking in this debate today. When it comes to a no-deal Brexit, we need to stop talking in terms of the hypothetical and the theoretical, and we need to start talking with candour about the real and damaging consequences it would bring. A no-deal Brexit would be damaging for everyone in my constituency, but particularly for the people who are the lifeblood of Brecon and Radnorshire, the farmers. Welsh farmers, as we heard this morning, export 40% of their lamb, and over 90% of that goes to the EU. Currently, if farmers in Brecon and Radnorshire export
I want us to leave the European Union with a deal, and I've voted 3 times to leave the European Union with a deal. And I regret the fact that it has become necessary for this bill to be brought forward now. And it is necessary now for 2 reasons. Firstly, because Parliament stands prorogued, so we will not have time potentially to bring Parliament back after my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has had the 30 days that he asked for, to see whether he has been successful in getting a deal. And secondly, because members of the government have speculated openly that the government may not comply with legislation even if it has passed, and we therefore need to allow time not merely for legislation but for litigation as well. And because I'll give way to the honourable member just once.
Just on that point, we've heard noises to that effect from certain members of the government and government sources. Would the right honourable member agree that if this bill is passed, it is very important the Prime Minister adheres to its terms, because it is a fundamental duty of a government to uphold the rule of law.
We know where the votes came from, and there is no question about it. They came from former Conservative members of Parliament, and some who are, unfortunately, I think by their own choice, in a position where they've been had the whip taken away from them. I regret it. I saw this happen myself on a previous occasion under the Maastricht Treaty, though it didn't happen to me personally. But I can only say that, you know, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And I noticed that my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, nods his head, because it is true, and that's how it goes. But the reality is that this particular provision, of course I will.
But isn't